Grade 9, Chapter Weathering the Storm in Ersama. This chapter has been penned by an Indian author. The author, Harshmender, is a great humanitarian and a social activist who has dedicated his life to working for the survivors victims of natural calamities, and he has also been working extremely hard to help the people, those who have been facing mass violence, communal riots, and bonded labor. The story gives an account of the storm that hit the coastal town of Ersama in Orissa state in the year 1999. The cyclone that hit Orissa in October 1999 killed thousands of people and devastated hundreds of villages. For two dreadful nights, Prashant, the protagonist of the story, a young man, was marooned on the roof of a house. On the third day, he decided to go to his village. What happens then? Did he find his friend and his family? Let us read the story and find out what did Prashant do when he was faced with the fury of the storm. In the evening, a dark and menacing storm quickly gathered. Winds beat against the houses with a speed and fury that Prashant had never witnessed before. Heavy and incessant rain filled the darkness. Ancient trees were uprooted and crashed to the earth. What Prashant could hear was only the screams that rent the air as people were frightened. They were horrified due to the storm, and the houses seemed to have been ruined and destroyed. The water gushed inside the village. The angry waters spilled into his friend's house, neck deep. Prashant was at his friend's place in the nearby village. He was away from his home when the village was hit by the horrifying storm. He was worried about what could have happened to his family members. The building was of brick and mortar. The place where he stayed, that is his friend's house, was sturdy. The house seemed to be still strong as it was made up of brick and mortar. Okay, as it was built with mortar, it seemed to be quite strong enough to survive the devastation of the wind's velocity that was about 350 kilometers per hour. Later on, this is how the people had to save themselves from the gushing wind and the heavy current of the water. To escape the waters rising in the house, Prashant and his friend's family had taken refuge on the roof. Prashant will never forget the shock he experienced at his first glimpse of the devastation that wrought by the super cyclone. In the grey light of the early morning, he could see that the people had been struggling hard. They had made the rafts like this and they were moving from one place to another. And what he could see is water, water everywhere. What happens after a few days? 2 days later, when things seem to have been quite still, Prashant, like 2 years, the rain seemed to have been stopped. For him, 2 days passed as if they were 2 years. Why was it so? Because he could not imagine how the life was before the storm did hit Odisha and how the things had changed drastically after a few days. So, this is how it was unbearable for him to see people struggle hard to save themselves and their family members. The rain ceased and the rainwater slowly began to recede. This was observed after 2 days. when Orissa was hit by the cyclone. Prashant was determined to seek out his family without further delay, but the situation was still dangerous, and his friend's family pleaded with Prashant to stay back a little while longer. Prashant thought that he should go to his town and fetch what could have happened there. He wanted to find out what was the condition of his family members. He wanted to help his family members, but he was helpless. And above all, his friend's family did not want Prashant to take the risk. They wanted him to stay with them for a little while. But Prashant knew he had to go. Prashant was a courageous boy. He thought that he should immediately rush to his village and see for himself what could have happened there. And this is how he thought he could be able to help his family members. Having thought so, he rushed towards the village. In every village that they passed, they could barely see a house standing. Prashant was accompanied by other two acquaintances. They were the villagers who were familiar to him. And so Prashant now wept out loud and long. He was sure that his family could not have survived this catastrophe. Although he wanted to help his family members, but he was not very much sure what could have been during the time of the cyclone. And he thought that it would be better if he could go and see for himself how his family members were. But on the other hand, he was sure that his family members could have not survived this catastrophe. Why did he think so? What happens when he reaches the village? As he reached his village, what he could see was the people who had been residing there. Their dead bodies were floating. The carcasses of other creatures were also floating. Everything seemed to have been ruined. Among the first people he saw in the crowd who had survived the catastrophe was his maternal grandmother. She seemed to be weak with hunger, but when she saw Prashant, she rushed to him, her hands outreached and outstretched, her eyes brimming. She was excited to see Prashant. So it was kind of a miracle for them that they could see each other alive. Prashant knew that everybody would have died, but then after meeting the grandmother, he was hopeful to see the other members of his family. By the next morning, as he took in the desperate situation in the shelter, now this is how you can see in the image that the people, those who had survived, they had taken refuge in the tent. So there was a kind of an effort that was made by the people, those who had survived, to stay together and make some arrangements so that they can have good shelter and food. So the people, those who have been the victims, they had gathered at one place, and when Prashant reached the village, he could see that things seemed to have been desperate. The situation was desperate, and he decided to get a grip over himself. Why does the narrator say so? In the narration, we read that Prashant, after seeing the people suffering a lot, thought to forget his pain. What was that made him more mournful? What made him more mournful was the death of his mother when his mother passed away. Until date, he was unable to forget her. But now, when he saw many people suffering, He thought that he could get the grip over himself. He sensed a deadly grief settling upon the 2,500 strong crowd in the shelter. So there were a lot many people, those who had taken shelter in the camp. 86 lives were lost in the village. So you can mark the line. 86 of them had lost their lives. Prashant organized a group of youths and elders to jointly pressurize the merchant once again to part with his rice. So he made an arrangement so that he can talk to the merchants in the village, get the grains. But what he could find was the rice that he could cook for the people, those who were hungry. So, with the help of the merchants in the village, he could make an arrangement to cook some rice. This time, the delegation succeeded and returned triumphantly, wading through the receding waters with food for the entire shelter. So, Prashant organized a group of youths and elders, and they pressurized the merchants in the village so that they can lend some grain. But then, when they could make an arrangement for rice, they seem to have been triumphant, that is successful in making some arrangements for the people, those who were in need in the shelter. So when they returned back, the people were excited to see Prasad. For the first time in 4 days, the survivors at the cyclone shelter were able to fill their bellies. His next task was to organize a team of youth volunteers to clean the shelter of filth. So everything seemed to have been ruined and everything seemed to have been disorganized and filthy. So Prashant, with the help of other youth volunteers, they tried to clean the filth. On the fifth day, a military helicopter flew over the shelter and dropped some food parcels. It then did not return. So Prashant and other people in the shelter, they could see that there were helicopters, those who had been providing them service. What was the service all about? They were throwing the food parcels. It then did not return. Okay, after throwing few food parcels, the helicopter did not return. The youth task force gathered empty utensils from the shelter. Then they deputed the children to lie in the sand left by the waters around the shelter with the utensils on their stomachs. This was a sign to communicate to the passing helicopters that they all were hungry. So, this was an effort that was made by Prashant and the other volunteers to make sure that the helicopters, those who were serving in the military and those who had been there to help the people, they could provide them with some food parcels. This is how the weeks passed. Prashant was quick to recognize that the women and the children were in real pain. They were sinking deeper and deeper in their grief. Although Prashant felt helpless at first, but then he thought to help the women and the children in the shelter. What did he do? Prashant's group believed that orphans should be resettled in their own community itself. So, to do so, they thought about the foster families and possibly in new foster families where the children and widows would live together, they would definitely live peacefully. Having thought so, the women and the children were allowed to live together. And this is how, in the adult care, the children seem to have been happy. And now it was about 6 months that had passed after the devastation. This time, Prashant's wounded spirit had healed. He had been grieving the death of his mother and he had been grieving the death of his other family members after the super cyclone. Why he felt peaceful? He felt peaceful and happy because he had no time to bother about his own pain. He was so engrossed in helping the women and the children resettle in their community that he thought that his life had been smooth sailing. He forgot about his own pain. His handsome, youthful face is what the widows and orphan children of his village seek out most in their darkest hours of grief. And people now started relying on Prashant. And Prashant, who had forgotten his own pain, was ready to do the selfless service. And he rushed here and there to make all the necessary arrangements to make the people in the shelter have a peaceful life. From this, we can conclude that Prashant was a brave boy. The Red Cross shelter he saw in the village inspired him a lot in his life, and this is how he was successful in helping others. People were happy and they blessed Prashant for what he had done for them. The initial government plan was to build up institutions for orphans and widows. But here, Prashant and other volunteers, when they thought to have foster families in their own community, people were very satisfied with how the life would be in the village after 6 months. It was a kind of an NGO that was called Food for Work that was proposed in the village. These volunteers wanted to settle the orphan and the children in foster families and give them love and security. So, to conclude, we can say that Prashant's efforts to help the people and make the life of the villagers smooth sailing had really brought about a change in the lives of the villagers. The havoc had led to better opportunities and serenity. Prashant seemed to have been a good leader. Read the story and comment on this.